look, there's my name. So my name's Justin Hopper. I'm a writer and occasionally artist and curator. And what I'm going to do is a little bit more general than what I think some of the other folks are going to do. I'm going to set up a little bit of a framework for the idea of place-based storytelling, psycho-geography, hauntology, whatever you want to call it, whatever term you want to use of the day. Psycho-geography not being the head term of the day. But as you can probably tell, I'm originally from America. I'm now based in the UK, and most of my work for the past 7 years has been based not just about the English landscape, but specifically about the South Downs. My father's from Brighton, my family's from Brighton. I just have a funny way of talking. So this region has sort of provided me with endless inspiration, and I've been fascinated with it since childhood. So my Sussex work includes a book called The Old Weird Albion, and an album, I don't know what it's called Shankly Rings, that are based around the theoretical conceit that human memories are stored in the landscape, and that through art we can experience or release them. And I'm going to talk about my own work in that way, a series called Public Record that I've done, which haunts places with long forgotten events through sound and poetry. And I'm going to talk about some other artists who, in one way or another, follow similar lines of thinking. But to start, just to set a little bit of a mood, I want to bookend this. The first bookend is going to be this sort of famed illustration of those kinds of ideas of memories being stored within place. So I'm not sure, has anybody here ever seen The Stone Tape, 1972 BBC horror film? Great, well then you're in for a real treat when you one day watch it. Ignore the acting, just enjoy the idea of what he's saying. So in this show, a group of British scientists is trying to invent a new recording medium. And they've been sequestered in this old manor house to do that. But almost immediately they begin to experience this haunting. And the ghost, they discover that there's a ghost of a young maid who fell to her death in 1890. And they're intrigued by the fact that the sounds, the screams that they hear, don't show up on the recordings when they're taping things. So here in this little clip I'm going to show you, the team's leader named Brock is explaining his theory of how that works.
Well, why did you shift it that way?
I didn't. You couldn't help it, love. The old intuition ran on that button.
Oh, look at this thing.
Beautiful. Simple. No, I'll start again.
Peter, it's the room.
What?
Just the room itself telling us.
Would you mind telling me
There is no ghost.
Hey!
Alright, try this for size. The room holds an image. And when people go in there, they pick it up. What you hear or what you see is inside your own brain.
Oh,
That'd be why the sounds don't echo, why we complicate. And that'd be why they don't record. No machine hears them.
I got them on my head.
You've got them in your head.
What about the hotspots?
Forget it,
I mean,
Eddie.
the whole temperature thing.
There isn't any.
You kind of know what I'm
The
told.
body's reaction like allergy, and just as quick your whole physiology is affected.
By what?
But what's in there?
But I thought you
Don't
said...
you get it yet? It must act like a recording, fixed in the floor and the walls. Right in the substance of them, a trace of what happened in there.
So, I don't know why that...
But why did you shift it that?
Going back. But, yeah, so obviously they're excited because they think they found this revolutionary new recording medium, this sort of recording via stone, via architecture, via place itself. So, and in fact, there's a whole sort of theory that's come out of this called stone tape theory. It actually began before that, but it took on this name. The idea that ghosts or hauntings or anything that we experience that's in that vein is actually like that, is actually a playback of events, of memory, of history, of mythology. So hopefully I can today help us to think a little bit in stone tape terms, to think of Hannington Lane, indeed any landscape, the idea of landscape itself as being a receptacle of memories, myths, history, and lost voices. And to think of our role in the hack tomorrow as being a spiritual experiment, a reverse exorcism, in a way, an attempt to raise hauntings and give voice to ghosts. Why does it do that? Rather than quiet them. And hopefully, as I offer up this framework, you'll also pick up some lines of inquiry, some questions to start asking, and ways to see the hack concept for tomorrow. So as I drag you into this framework for thinking, I want to offer you the idea that landscape, thank you, as a concept, and certainly as an artistic genre, is inherently similar to augmented reality and even VR. Excuse that sound. So here are two paintings I'm going to show you by extremely important landscape painters of the 17th and 19th century. So this one is called Landscape with Hagar and the Angel by Claude Lorrain. Obviously it's fantastical. It's populated by biblical figures, if you can actually see them. But the place itself, right, is at least plausible, which was a sort of change in that era of landscape painting. But take a look at this, and then take a look at this next one. A painting of Dedham Vale, which is where I currently live, actually, by the English painter John Constable, a disciple of Claude's, who nonetheless was painting famously, I'm sure, the area is called Constable Country. He was painting his home territories in detail. But if you look, he's actually painted Claude's painting. He's framed his own territory. He's altered, or at least framed, a real view in his home, such that it mirrors Claude's painting, which at the time would have been really famous. But he's taking out the biblical scenes and just letting the landscape and the architecture, if you can see the tiny Dedham church in the very center, where you would see the stone outcropping in this, the temple. So he's mirroring that painting, taking out the biblical scenes, and just letting the landscape and architecture speak for itself. And I use this because it's so blatant, right? When we represent the landscape, we do so through our subjective conceptualization of the world with our subjective conceptualization of the world in tow. We bring our myths, we bring our memories, we bring all of that to the way we literally see what we call landscape. Each of us sees landscape differently. So we do the same with cartography, right? When we map places. So here's two maps of the world. This is a medieval map where everything in the entire world is positioned as it relates to Jerusalem. You see that red dot in the center is Jerusalem. This is the way the medieval world saw Earth, right? And here's another one from the 18th century that might seem more apt for today. It's at least the northern hemisphere. You see London is the dead center of the entire northern hemisphere of the world. Everything else is in relation to it. So what do we see then when we look at this kind of map, with which I'm sure you're all familiar? When we look at Google Maps, the same way that everything is based on Jerusalem or everything is based on London in these previous eras, now we see everything's based, sure, on Puget's Cottage, but mostly it's breakfast club, gastro bars, banks, lush. So now this could just be because at some point I looked for restaurants in Brighton, but and remembered that. But I don't think so. I think we mostly get similar kinds of things. So so what we end up with is something that's very personal indeed, but it's also prosaic, very present tense. I once interviewed this artist, Ragnar Kjartansson, Icelandic artist, and he used to make these long durational pieces, performances that almost no one saw. He said the reason he did this is because Iceland has no real history of artistic objects, right? It's a saga culture, a literary and musical and storytelling culture. Every hill, as tiny as it may be, is the hill where Magnusson slew Thorson, and each stream is where Gudrun bathed the day before something else happened. So Ragnar makes these performances not as the final product, but such that the telling of the tale later is the artwork. I once saw this mad Icelander singing in a barn at the end of that road. So this offers us a different way of mapping the world through a kind of analog augmented reality, folk tales, folk songs, even just ordinary storytelling. We all map the world through that kind of narrative. Because the map and the landscape it attempts to describe are subjective. We each encounter the landscape, be that a street, or a room, or a ruin, or a sweeping down, or a Devon riverscape, as bearing the memories and myths that we bring to it. So when John Acomfra, for example, visits the River Tamar in Devon, he doesn't see these waterways that connect centuries of mines and mining trade. He sees the slave trade and the first encounters between white Englishmen and Africans in the 16th and 17th centuries. He implicates the landscape by doing this. He sees the landscape in a way that makes it guilty. These two are stills from his film Tropicos, in which he places these sort of gorgeous tableaux inspired by period European painting, but out of joint. So you see African and European scenes and scenes that confuse the two, all in this lush riverine landscape in Devon. I'm going to skip a couple things here really quickly and get to this. And one of the potent, so that's an example of a way that we can use the landscape, that we can drop things into the landscape in a way that changes the way we experience that same place. And similarly, one of the potent ways, and I think some of the artists later on will discuss this, but one of the potent ways in which artists have haunted places with those places past is with virtual memorials. So for example, this is called Frontera de los Muertos, or Border Memorial, by John Craig Freeman, and it populates the US-Mexico border with these traditional imagery of markers to those who have died trying to cross the border into the United States. But not everything has to be so weighty, right? So Freeman's also made this AR project called Lost Things Over Liverpool, which does a very similar thing, but in a much less weighty manner. It's objects and concepts that people are lost in Liverpool. He's gone and interviewed people around the city and said, what have you lost? And they've given him answers, everything from my wallet, my keys, to my virginity, my youth, my hope, to women's rights, to the dodo bird, right? So he's then populated Liverpool with these things. This is them hovering above their locations in the city. And that brings us to the city. Cities offer us really deep, rich veins of history, like right here. History, memory, and mythology to dig through. Like Ragnar's Icelandic hills, every inch of our city is indebted to centuries of layers upon layers of cultural reference points. Think of something like Whitehawk, which to some people is a 5,000-year-old camp. Some people is a 20th century housing estate. Some people it's the site of an important literary event. Any number of other things, and of course all the personal things that have happened here. This is where I was born. This is where I met my wife, etc., etc. My ghosts and your ghosts inhabit the same space. Like archaeologist Monica L. Smith says, when we make something new in the city, we have to do so in the footprint of something that's already there, which is where we're standing here. So these are the ideas behind my own project, which is called Public Record. So for Public Record, I scour newspapers for small, forgotten events that fit into a certain theme. For this one that you're looking at here, well, you're looking at Pisa, it was in Leigh-on-Sea in Southend in Essex. A very, very old fishing village next to Southend. Well, Southend's an old fishing village too. But the theme was these minor shipwrecks and loss at sea. So I take these texts from stories that I find through digging through the newspapers. And I turn them into poems, which the audience listens to when I walk around the areas in which the events originally took place. So for example, the piece you're about to hear is called Every Easter Blessing. And this is the newspaper article, part of it, from which it is taken. The story of a man who, from all evidence, committed suicide at Southend, washed up on the Estuary shore. And it contains text from other similar incidents from the same period. Large parts of the poem are actually taken directly from the text of this article and reworked into a poetic format, or from other sources, travel writing, Victorian travel writing, Victorian nature writing, writing about the Essex-Kent oyster rivalries. Doesn't sound like poetry fodder, does it? But hopefully the result is something new, a conjuring of this man, James Mantle, of whom this inquest is possibly the only surviving record. So along with some photos of the locations, just listen to a minute of this, if I can make it work right.
Wishing you every Easter blessing. Down in the Southend oyster beds, 30 miles from the old East End, new pearls once were formed, never claimed by Kentish fishermen. 2 keys, a knife, a pencil and a spectacle glass, 2 and 5 in money, gloves but no hat. A table of special services for December belonging to Whitechapel Church, and an envelope posted from New York to James Mantle, Whitechapel, London. Wishing you every Easter blessing.
If Brighton be London super-Mare, I claim then for Southend that it be London super-Fluvium, of which there is quite as salt as the sea. On a Monday, Southend is London. All North London is here. It came down by special train from Chalk Farm, all the East End from Fenchurch Street. You may safely assume all are such that you meet.
The man in question was caretaker of Whitechapel Church, and since the burning of that edifice, his services were no longer required. There being no mortuary provided, the body was allowed to remain on the beach for some time. The water was not flowing over him, just beyond the oyster beds, fully dressed, except his hat. There is quite as salt as the sea, and as shining pearls as the East End, these strange fruits of the oyster beds that Whitechapel East once sent.
So you might not have been able to hear it, but in there are all these little details of the things that were on this man's person: 2 and 5 and money and a knife, and this letter that begins to Mr. Mantle, wishing you every Easter blessing. And those things just really sort of, those tiny little objects that are part of everything we know about this person, make up such a poetic sort of response to this kind of situation. It's so exciting to me, and to think that this is the kind of project that we can work on here. I'm actually going to tell you, I'm going to skip playing this, but I'm going to tell you about, whoa, I accidentally started playing it. Oh well. 2 other examples of projects in that vein that I've done is one in my hometown of Pittsburgh. We mapped the city's late 19th century crime, and we geotagged those locations so that when you walked into the scene of a crime that happened in 1885, the stealing of a coat or even a murder, you triggered that poem in your headphones, brought these people to life, these people for whom there is no other record other than this single event. And I think that by taking those kinds of things, by taking these objects, we can place them in space. We can transform that space and haunt it with those other visions. So the idea, which I think is extremely viable for Lane, for example, is to find these kinds of records, find these kinds of stories, oral histories, people's tales, who might otherwise be lost to history, and honor them with a kind of poetic response. I hope we can work on that at some point. I'm just going to ask you to think about, I'm going to play you, hopefully I can have 1 extra minute because I want to play this video. But as we go through the rest of the conversations and presentations tonight, I'd like to leave you with a couple of questions. What kinds of memories and histories do you imagine can be unlocked within these lanes? Your own memories, sure, those of friends and family, but what else might there be? Who or what do you think may have transpired, and what might have been lost? What can we change just by offering people a different way of looking at, listening to, and moving through the same space they've moved through before? Can we change the landscape by changing the way people remember it? How can we offer an experience that makes poetry the most prosaic objects, a hat shop or a stone wall with a footprint of an old building? And finally, who are we hacking for? What are we trying to teach or learn, and who are we trying to haunt? I'll leave you with this video. Jim Eno is a member of the Zuni tribe in New Mexico in the southwestern U.S. He's a farmer, but he's also director of the tribe's Museum and Heritage Center. And he's working with fellow Zuni artists to create new maps that bring his people's perspective back. Here he's talking about how his people map their world, but it strikes me as being really similar to the ideas we're talking about, really similar to virtual reality, to augmented reality, the absurdity he talks about of a map being thought of as 2-dimensional.
When I come to this place, it's like a special place in the bookshelf library, our culture's library. Well, today we take pictures, sometimes selfies of ourselves and our ancestors marking on the rocks here, things that they saw. And turkeys and deer, And there's stuff all over. You can see things, zigzags, hash marks. It's a fish. That's a really rare one. Religious leaders began to see petroglyphs here that are the same as those in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. A certain clan symbol, a certain way of making a spiral. It has a Zuni signature. That helps us to connect these dots and bring the whole story together. We limit ourselves if we think of maps as only two-dimensional. A map may be something we heard from our grandmother about a place. There are maps in songs and in prayers. There are maps that are etched in stone and woven into textiles and painted on ceramics. Google Maps and any other kinds of maps really, while they're very helpful, the names around here are in English or Spanish, and so they completely leave off the meaning of the place. It is replacing our language and eclipsing our language and knowledge with something different, something that's not really from here. This whole constellation of what makes up a map, to me, has always been far beyond a piece of paper.
All right. Thanks very much. Sorry for going on.